Hello. In the following 3 videos, we're going to discuss together the classic novel Frankenstein by British author Mary Shelley. In this first video, we're going to take a look at Mary Shelley's personal life and how events in her life have inspired her to write this Gothic story. Then, in the second video, we'll discuss briefly the plot of the novel. And in the third and final video, we're going to have a short review of the novel. Frankenstein is not just a classic novel, it's actually a phenomenon. And the reason is that it has been an inspiration for many authors and artists who have produced works based on Frankenstein. For example, we have the novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Stevenson. And in the Arab world, we have a novel called Frankenstein in Baghdad by Ahmad Saadawi. Moreover, hundreds of plays have been produced based on Frankenstein, and at least 100 movies, starting with the famous set of movies starring Boris Karloff that were produced in the 30s, and many more produced after that, and I'll mention Mary Shelley's Frankenstein by Kenneth Branagh and starring Robert De Niro as the creature. Now, let's take a look at Mary Shelley's personal life. First, we'll meet her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft. Wollstonecraft was born in the second half of the 18th century. She's a British writer, philosopher, and an advocate of women's rights. In 1790, a year after the French Revolution started, Mary wrote her first political pamphlet answering the conservative Irish politician Edmund Burke's reflections on the revolution in France. In 92, she traveled to France to participate in the revolutionary events and wrote one of the earliest feminist books calling for the emancipation of women. In 93, she wrote a history of the early French Revolution. In 1794, and after being abandoned by the American diplomat Ilmai, Mary returned to London, delivered her illegitimate daughter Fanny, and then tried to take her own life, but she was saved. Later, she met William Godwin, and in 97, after she became pregnant with his child, they got married, but unfortunately, Mary died in the same year. Mary Shelley's father is William Godwin. He too was born in the second half of the 18th century. He was an English journalist, a political philosopher, and a novelist. Godwin had radical and revolutionary ideas, but he believes that reform should be achieved through education and discussion. He published several books: An Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, followed by The Adventures of Caleb Williams, a novel which reiterated the same ideas that he wrote in his nonfiction book. Mary Shelley's mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, died 11 days after giving birth to her. So Mary Shelley was raised by her dad and a nanny until she was 3 years old. When Mary turned 4, Godwin married his neighbor Mary Clement. With this marriage, Mary Shelley had 4 siblings: Fanny, her half-sister on her mother's side, Charles and Claire, who were the son and daughter of Mary Clement, her stepmother, and a half-brother on her father's side, William. Mary Shelley and Mary Clements did not get along. They basically hated each other. And Mary Shelley only found love at her mother's grave. Godwin gave Mary an extremely rich informal education that many school graduates and maybe even college graduates would envy. She read her mother's biography that her father wrote after the death of Mary Wollstonecraft, and she also read all of her mother's manuscripts, including, of course, the Vindication of the Rights of Women. Godwin encouraged Mary to read about or attend talks by the top scientists of her era, such as the chemist Humphrey Davy, who generated electricity using chemistry, the Italian biologists Galvini and his nephew Aldini, And also in the field of evolution, Mary was very much aware of the work of Erasmus Darwin, the grand uncle of Charles Darwin. At the age of 14, Godwin sent Mary to live with an acquaintance in Scotland, probably because of the very tense relationship between Mary and her stepmother. When she was 16, she returned back to London to live with her father, and that's when she was introduced to one of her father's political followers, Percy Shelley. Mary and Percy fell in love, and a romantic relationship started between them, despite the fact that Percy was already married with children. Percy and Mary usually met at the cemetery near her mother's grave. When Godwin found out about this relationship, he prevented them from seeing each other, and so they decided to elope to Europe together, causing a rift between Mary and her father. Interestingly, Mary's stepsister Claire also ran away with them. After 6 weeks of roaming around Europe, they ran out of money and they all returned back to England, penniless and with a pregnant Mary. Over the next 2 years, they were ostracized by both families and they were in constant debt. And Mary and Percy's first child was born prematurely and died shortly after. In 1816, and after the suicide of Percy Shelley's first wife Harriet, Mary and Percy got married. And a couple of years later, they left to Italy, where their second and third children died of illnesses before Mary gave birth to her last and only surviving child, Percy Florence Shelley. But that wasn't the end of tragedies. In 1822, Percy drowned when his sailing boat sank during a storm near their home in Italy. A year later, Shelley returned to England and devoted herself to the upbringing of her son and a career as a professional author, and she also published a book of Shelley's work. In the last decade of her life, Mary was dogged by illness, and she died in 1850 at the age of 53. And if you're interested to learn more about this stranger-than-fiction life of Mary Shelley, I highly recommend the movie Mary Shelley by female Saudi director Haifa Al-Mansour.
My choices made me who I am, and I regret nothing.
This concludes the first video. I'll see you soon in video number 2.